Welcome friends, my name is Jesse. Welcome to the weekly for the week of March 10th. Today we're talking about modern day idols. So in our passage today in Acts 19, we see that Paul has been in Ephesus for about 2 years. Ephesus is this big city, kind of like New York City, but 2,000 years ago. And he has been in a lecture hall daily discussing Christ with people that would come and go. In Ephesus is a temple called the Artemis Temple. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world. And it is this magnificent structure, larger than a football field, massive marble structure. Artemis is the goddess of fertility, and Paul has been telling the people in Ephesus that it is not real, that man-made gods are no gods at all. And so what begins to happen is Paul is so influential in Ephesus that people stop buying the little idol statues of Artemis to go sacrifice in the temple. And so this guy Demetrius gathers all of the craftsmen and artisans who make these idols, and he tells them, hey, our prophets and the goddess herself are being threatened. And so they start a riot in Ephesus. And so that's basically what happens in the story. Now, underneath all this, Paul understands that people make idols out of things that God has made. I love the way that Romans 1 captures this idea. Paul tells us that people have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made by man. That idea of this exchange is so important. You see, the good things that God has created, we replace those things for God himself. We begin to worship people and things that God has made rather than God himself. You see, we all have a choice to make. We will either glorify and idolize and worship and value God or the things that God has made. An idol is anything that we cannot live without. It's the things that we long for, the things that we seek after, and if we're honest, it's the things that control our lives. One of the crazy things about modern day idols is that the things that we worship, the things that we idolize, they begin to form us and shape us into their image. Our soul is shaped by the things that we worship. When we worship creation, the things that God has made, it distorts the thing that God has designed. It begins to get darkened, and it begins to darken and form and shape us in a negative way. One example of a modern day idol are screens. iPhones and just tablets and screens in general become a place of worship. Google, Meta, they invest billions of dollars to own our eyeballs and our minds from cradle to the grave. Neuroscientists are hired to design these algorithms to hook our brains. Every time there's a notification, cortisol is released. Life is so stressful, and life can make us restless. And we feel compelled to reach for our phones to check them for relief from the stress of life. And it turns out that the most effective trigger are our friends. Thumbs up and hearts and comments are the thing that compel us. We swipe the glass like a gambler on the casino floor, pulling that lever, swiping again over and over again, releasing dopamine in our brains, hoping we're just gonna get that hit that we want. These daily ceremonies, these rituals that happen in our car, in our bedroom, on our couch, in the bathroom, you name it, those places of our daily ritual and ceremony become places of worship between us and the glowing glass of our phones. Now, we think that as adults, we would have better self-control over our phones and our screens and the billion-dollar companies that are trying to hook us, but we don't. And what's even more concerning is that kids and youth, we think that they are naturally going to be able to navigate these things, but they don't have the experience. Their brains, the frontal cortex of their brains, do not have the ability to know how to navigate these things. The moment a young person gets a phone, they know that they have access to a whole new world of possibilities. It turns out that they don't know how to naturally handle the power and the freedom given to them through a phone. And it's just a grim diagnosis, especially for young people, that they're not sleeping. Depression and loneliness and addiction, there's just they're getting hooked by these devices. They grasp for their phones like an oxygen tank, unable to breathe without them, absolutely dependent on their screens. For all of us, young and old, when a phone becomes an idol in our lives, it distorts our ability to connect with God, to commune with God, other people, and it distorts our own identity, our own understanding of ourselves. You see, we were created for communion with God. Our souls need God, but we are settling for social connection in a place of communion with God. And our souls are restless. And when they're restless, we often reach for the wrong thing. St. Augustine, he wrote a famous statement. He says, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. He says, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. You see, our souls were designed by God, were made by God for God's presence and for worship of Him and Him alone. He alone can satisfy us. He alone is worthy of our affection and our love and our praise. You see, Paul is on a mission in Acts 19. He is on a mission to set people free from the idols of his day and the idols of our day so that we can freely worship God without anything in the way. And Paul wants us to join him in this mission to help others be set free from worshiping idols. Jesus wants you to join him on this mission. It's part of our calling and our purpose. But the truth is that we need to be freed from our idols and for us to worship Jesus. And again, this can be anything that takes the place of God. The typical caricatures are sex, money, and power, but it can even be family, our church, politics. Anything can become an idol. Good things even can become an idol. And all of these things God has created. There's nothing wrong with any of these things, but they need to find their proper place in submission to the lordship of God. What would be hard for you to live without? Think about that. What satisfies your cravings, your satisfaction outside of God? What controls you? What must you have in your life? What brings you comfort? Maybe tonight you're like, man, I really want that thing. Imagine that God would transform your love from those idols and the things that we have just allowed to control us and form us and shape us to Him and Him alone, and then to help others also turn their love from idols to God. God loves you, and He has the power to change your heart and my heart. So I want you to discuss this idea of modern day idols in your house church.